Perfect. So with Hanson, these are kind of our headline figures about it. We have a large percentage of students who are EAL. The majority of them are completely bilingual, but we do have 56 students currently in intervention. That number changes all of the time. We have a massive kind of in and out kind of in our school, especially of students that are new to English. Um, we we got turned into Delta Trust 2 years ago. Um, so in 2022, Delta took over. Previously to that, Hanson had been considered a failing school and had gone in and out of special measures for about 10 years. So when Delta took over in 2022, they did an entire reshuffle and everything changed and all the systems were kind of ripped up and started again. And as part of that, I was given quite a blank slate to create an EAL provision within school. So previously to that, there was minimal stuff. There was some stuff there, but not um, to the depth that was needed, in my view. So I had a couple of quite big tasks to decide which students needed intervention and what types of interventions to run. I need to develop some curriculums for those. I wanted to raise the profile of new to English students around school. I didn't want them to be kind of the forgotten students in the corner. And I wanted to change the admissions process as well for new starters, just to make sure we were giving them like a real nice introduction to school and quite often introduction to the UK as well. So quite a big job to do. But it's still a bit of a work in progress. There is still stuff to do. We are looking at applying for our Sanctuary Award soon, so there's still stuff to do. So I've kind of put bits together about what I did for each of those things, and hopefully some of it will be useful. So with finding students for intervention, obviously we spoke to teachers. Teachers were really, really keen on seeing what they could do to help. I think a lot of them had found it really difficult having a child in their classroom previously, that they just didn't know how to help and they didn't even know where to start with. So speaking to teachers, I found like years of pent up frustration and them really wanting to make a difference. I tested all of the students that were identified. We tested according to the Bell Foundation guidelines. And I also looked at their English books. Some of the students I found didn't test massively well, but if I looked at their English book, they could do a lot more than they could in the test. I think maybe the stress and the pressure of it. So obviously with those students, I dug a little bit deeper. Our initial test, because we have so many students coming in to our school on a regular basis, we have to have our test that's really accessible. So our questions start super simple. They can be done by anybody. And it's like, what's your name? And then it gets harder, like describe the room you're in, describe your perfect dream day, and things like that, just to make it so the test can be done by any member of staff. And then the paper gets given to me afterwards so we can put them into that intervention group kind of as soon as possible, even if I'm teaching full day and don't necessarily have time to meet them and things like that. So our admissions process, we've changed this a lot. Previously, students would start and just go straight into mainstream, and then get picked up for intervention after. But we wanted it to be a really nice, smooth process so students felt completely welcome in our school and knew what to expect and had that consistency. So we now do an induction day. During that day, they learn how to use the canteen, they meet with their head of year, they look at the school expectations, they do a treasure hunt around school where they have to answer specific questions. But during that day, the teacher that runs it assesses the level of English of them throughout the day and assesses their understanding. So from the initial test and from this, we're able to get a more clear picture of our students. I'll always go and meet them as well and make sure we know as much as we can about them before we put them into the main school. And I'll always make a student profile about them as well, which is distributed to teachers, just like an SEND profile would be. We have new to English profiles as well. Then once we've done all of that, I will go one of two ways. They'll either get put into an intervention group and into mainstream the rest of their timetable, or they'll have a week-long crash course. The crash course, we don't find we have to do that often. We've only ever done 2 of them. Most students will go straight into mainstream, but with quite a lot of intervention. And then we re-look at that intervention every term just to make sure our students are still getting the best deal, as their levels of English can change quite quickly. So the student profile I mentioned, this is a fake one I made a while ago. So we have a little caption about the student, telling teachers about them so that they have like a way in with that student, also giving resources that can help, and about their level of English as well. Teachers have so much to do, they don't need to assess a child's understanding of English on top of teaching their 30 other students for maybe the 1 hour they see of them a week. So we found this really, really important. So teachers knew a bit about the students initially, so they had that way in. The bottom half of it looks like this. Sorry, I couldn't get it in one slide. It has strategies on it as well, and kind of practically what the Bell Foundation framework means and what a B or a C in English means. We also find it really useful to put on who in school speaks that language. So we have most languages that our children speak, a teacher within school will be able to speak. So those teachers are quite often used for phoning home. So for example, today I phoned home for a student in year 8 because his dad speaks French. So we use each other to translate and make sure we get really clear lines of communication with home. So our intervention is in 3 parts. We have 3 different groups. They're set. So our bottom set, we call them group 3. They receive 8 hours of intervention. They're pulled off their normal timetable and have 8 hours. Their focus is being understood and understanding basic things. A lot of them will also get kind of additional to their 8 hours. They'll get phonics intervention or letter forming intervention, depending on their need. And they can also get maths intervention as well. And we find that especially needed with students with like limited previous schooling. Our middle group, they get 6 hours. For them, it's a heavier focus on reading and writing, and more than just being understood. These ones, we want them to use good grammar and be kind of correct in their English. With these ones, the curriculum I've designed so that it follows the curriculums around school. So for example, if they're doing earthquakes and geography, they'll look at vocab to do with earthquakes in their intervention lesson just before they study it. So they'll see words, all the kind of words to do with earthquakes, but the more basic ones. Recently, one of the students was doing about the Norman conquest in history, and so that was also on our curriculum for NTE. And so he was able to go to his history lesson and he told his history teacher all sorts of facts about the Norman conquest. He could tell them who the king was at the time. He could tell them all sorts of stuff. And it just meant that lesson was so much more accessible to him. And he could go into kind of the analysis side of things rather than the factual side of things that he would have done if he hadn't have had that intervention. So we find that really, really useful. I chose history, geography and science. I couldn't cover all of them, unfortunately, just because those were the ones that in my brain were the most technical in terms of language and understanding, and history as well, because the students are unlikely to have studied the history that we study in schools before. It gives that bit of extra help on kind of assumed knowledge. Our top set group is very similar. They get 3 hours a week, and their focus is on extending vocab. They are kind of our almost fluent group. We try to get them to read for pleasure as well. and their curriculum follows a really similar way to the group 2 one as well. So they follow what they're doing in mainstream school. At any point, any student can be put in for additional ICT intervention. We find that a lot of our students have really poor ICT literacy when they join us. So they have like really basic computer skills lessons where they learn things like that. And that the ICT can be of any level student. Even our students that come to us who are completely bilingual, they can also be put into that intervention if they're new to country and need that additional support. So my last kind of project in my list was to raise the profile around school. This one is the one that's the biggest work in progress, I think, because I wanted to prioritise the others first. We've done whole school staff CPD on teaching NTE students. Staff were generally really grateful for that, and they felt a lot more able to help the students in their class. I've also made it much clearer which students are in intervention. It comes up on their register. They've got like a little E by their name, so every student is known if they are in NTE intervention. I've also tried to make myself as available as possible for questions from staff, and I get a lot of questions that are specific about individual students, which I find really nice. It shows me that all of these teachers are caring so much about the students in their class and really wanting to help them, which is just lovely. On the student side, I couldn't list everything that we've done, but just a couple of things. We created language ambassadors. We now use them when new students arrive that speak that language. They help with translation if needed, and they help us kind of integrate that child into school. I originally set up a buddy system, and that really didn't work. I was expecting much better, but I think our teenagers, if you told them who to be friends with, they want to be friends with absolutely everybody except that person. So we found that a language ambassador, if you give them like a job title instead of a forced friendship, it has the same effect. They just don't feel like you're forcing them into it. We also have done school trips for NTE students, so they get the kind of wider school experience. We've sent 31 students to Alton Towers for free last half term. All of them were part of our NTE students cohort. And we've also introduced prizes for progress in NTE end of term celebration assembly. So we've got one of those coming up in a few weeks. And the prizes are really practical. So last year they were coats and bags, and the students that are winning them are the ones that need coats and bags. They all are wonderful, so you have to choose. The last tiny thing, there's a couple of bits that I wish I'd have been told like earlier on, because when I was making this provision, I obviously did a lot of research, and there's just a couple of bits that I wish I'd have known sooner. One is using ChatGPT for making resources. I think I got this from the Bell Foundation. It was really, really useful. Loads of our teachers now use it, not just for NTE students, but for any student who's struggles with reading. 1 minute, I'm going to put on full screen. Can you still see it all right? Perfect. So I put what I put in ChatGPT. So I went for earthquakes. I got a text from Bite Size, and the things you can do with it just blew my mind. You can ask what the reading age is, and it tells you, but you can also edit the reading age using it. So you could change it to age 5, which was really useful for our students. Because they're accessing exactly the same work. The information in that text is exactly the same, just the sentences are shorter, it's much more accessible. So we do this kind of thing for our students in lessons. You can also make vocab lists with it, and the vocab list will be fully based on the text that you put in, and you can do it that includes pictures. You have to say emojis, you can't say pictures, it doesn't work for some reason. So you can help students that way. I've not put it on here, but you can do a vocab list with pictures and a translation as well. I've used that quite a lot for one of my Portuguese speaking students, and she's found that really, really helpful, especially in her history lessons. You can also just translate the full text as well. And we try to stay away from just pure translation, because we want them to be proficient at that subject in English in the longer term. So we do it sometimes, but not regularly. Vocab lists and changing reading ages is a lot more effective for us generally. The other thing I wish I'd have found earlier is this website. It looks really dodgy, but it does work. It's called Online Doc Translator. You can upload PDFs and it translates them for you. So any texts that are like absolutely vital for our students, we do translate. So every student gets like a little, it's almost like a textbook. We call it a knowledge organizer. And there's a page for each subject in it. And they get a new one every term. So this is one of the maths pages, and I've translated it into Bengali for a student. And you can translate, you just put it into the software and it just does it. It's magical. So I translated all of these little books for each student in lots of different languages. So they get their like little textbook for school they get the English one obviously, and they get the one in their language so they can compare and use them kind of side by side to help them in lessons. That's a website that I definitely wish I'd have found sooner because it is really, really helpful. And yeah, that's it from me.